Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Bill, it is a pleasure to have you back on the show and back so soon because I had to get to the root of the kind of core problem in my life right now, which is RFK and LBJ. This relationship that when you Google it, it'll tell you that it was this deep seated and all this other type of. And I'm just like, well, where did it start? Like, how did it go? And obviously, I'm going to have you reintroduce yourself for the new audience members out there listening. But I wanted to kind of dispel because I'm sure you've come across a lot of this stuff as well too. Things get written about in articles or books and all these types of things. And next thing you know, it becomes part of the history. And I've tried my hardest to understand more about LBJ. Was he behind the Kennedy assassination? I never really thought. I think we both are in agreement on that one. And then kind of looking more at the matters of like what was going on and trying to understand the time periods through eyes of people that were around back then, whether it's through tapes, biographies, interviews, all these things, and trying to get the facts. And sadly, I think the only people that could tell you if they actually like the person might actually be the person themselves. So we have to kind of look at what they said in public versus what they said in private. And again, that all boils down to kind of hearsay in a sense. But I want to, Bill, give you the second to be able to introduce yourself again for the new audience members out there listening, and we'll get right into the meat and potatoes.
Okay, Robin, thank you again for giving me the opportunity to talk. I started my life in politics and public service working on Robert F. Kennedy's Senate staff in New York, and then on his 1968 presidential campaign. He was an inspiration to me then, and he remains an inspiration to me now. Most of my work recently has been in public policy on issues like Social Security and Medicare. I do want to make one correction of something I said in the first podcast, Rob. I mentioned about Robert Kennedy's relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, how Hoover could not accept the fact that he was taking orders from a young whippersnapper. And I said Robert Kennedy was 38. He was actually 35 when he became Attorney General. And when he resigned, he was 38. I just wanted to get that fact corrected for the record.
Well, he's one of the people I wanted to talk about also when it came to the kind of relationships that went on in the White House. Because again, it's very muddy when you're reading it, however many years after the fact. And then we got to kind of understand what were the times like, what were they saying and on magazines, articles, all these other types of things. But the main topic is LBJ and RFK. But let's start off with kind of the one you mentioned, RFK's relationship with J. Edgar Hoover. Now, I appreciate RFK. I kind of want to get your perspective on him back then versus what your thoughts are on him now after all this history and information and documents come out and you start to kind of, he was wiretapping Martin Luther King, all these different things that start going on. You kind of want to understand like what's going on. And I'm wondering if your perspective changed on Bobby Kennedy.
Well, his relationship with Hoover was a difficult one, as you might expect. Hoover was rather close to Robert Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy. In fact, he would socialize, and he was a master at the secrets. J. Edgar Hoover developed power based on keeping secrets involving people who were powerful. And John Kennedy and the Kennedy family were among those for whom he kept dossiers. When Robert Kennedy was under consideration for Attorney General, among the people he talked to was J. Edgar Hoover. And Hoover actually encouraged him. And then Kennedy said afterwards, I didn't believe he was being honest with me. So there was always that suspicion in terms of what Hoover's role was. Hoover was the first person President Kennedy reappointed when he was elected. The second person was Allen Dulles. And that tells you something. That's how powerful those two people were in Washington. And President Kennedy did not want to start off by making enemies of those two.
Do you think Hoover took anything personal, or do you think he was strictly looking at it from a Boy Scout mentality? Well, most of the time you look at Hoover, like there's so much of a mixed relationship with RFK where it's not just about business anymore. It's like RFK went to him about so many things and Hoover was happy to help. And again, we talk about the power Hoover had. Hoover had blackmail on everybody. He spent Helen Gandy and an FBI agent spent 3 days burning all the files that he had in his house after he died. That was proven in the church committee. But when it came to the power of Hoover, it seemed like anything that could be a slight against Hoover, like getting the FBI without asking Hoover to do something, or like Nixon, for instance, forcing the FBI to do something that, Hoover, he didn't want to go to Hoover with, or however, these issues can seem as like a slight to a person. And a lot of people in politics, again, will describe in this episode with Johnson and RFK, those little slights tend to be taken as personal. But Hoover didn't do that as much. He took it more as like a professional thing. Like, we're going after the same goal, right? Like, I'm hunting communists. Are you hunting communists? Like, it was that question.
And communism was his number one obsession. He saw communists everywhere. He did not take organized crime seriously. And Robert Kennedy had to pretty much say, look, this is my priority, not communists, organized crime. So they had a conflict over policy from the start. Hoover also was facing the mandatory retirement age, and he did not want to leave. And he was very concerned that his tenure would be terminated after so many years as head of the FBI. He was the FBI in his view. He was the FBI. And his own personal peccadillos interfered, in my view, with his ability to be an effective FBI leader. He was so caught up in oddities that I think it clouded his judgment and his ability. He hated Martin Luther King. He called him a notorious liar. And he let his hatred for people drive what he had the FBI do. And he had odd habits. This is going to sound unusual, but he would not let Secret Service agents who were driving him ever make left-hand turns. Can you believe that? He so hated the left that he would not let drivers make left-hand turns. I mean, you think of stuff like that, and the word psychosis comes to mind. So yeah, I think he was a very odd character, and Robert Kennedy had to treat him delicately because of all the dossiers that he was compiling.
Do you believe that he kind of fueled some of the maybe separation between LBJ and RFK on certain discussions and topics? It seems like the phone calls with Hoover from LBJ's tapes, if they weren't about serious investigative matters that are going to be a giant kind of issue for the government, he wasn't really called. Like, you would think the best friend relationship we always hear about with LBJ and Hoover, it wasn't as many phone calls as I've heard with so many others that aren't even named ever when LBJ's name comes up, which is weird why we don't know about them, because they had some pretty weird things to say, like Robert Kittner. I'll play it a little bit later. They're talking about the Kennedys, and he's stating to LBJ, the Kennedys don't like you. Like, just telling him, like, putting that into his head. And LBJ's like, look, I don't know where you're reading your sources. And he's talking to him like, it's not that bad of a relationship. Maybe you're just taking it out of somewhere. But a lot of these people are whispering into the ears, next thing you know, you get paranoid about your own friend or the supposed friend, and you get a horrible relationship that sparks up. But do you think Hoover was fuel for this fire?
Absolutely. Hugh Hoover and Johnson were neighbors in D.C. Johnson used to call him my brother. I trust you more than anyone else. So they had a very strong mutual relationship. And Hoover was very adept at feeding Johnson things that he knew would get Johnson upset. So yeah, in fact, I think in the first week of Johnson's presidency, he probably spent more time talking to Hoover than anyone else. That's how close they were.
That was because of the assassination and other relevant information that was happening towards that. What do you know about RFK's kind of using Hoover for things or becoming very close with Hoover? I think I mentioned it in our last episode, which was that RFK kind of used Hoover to learn the methods and strategic stuff to use wiretapping abilities. And we know about the wiretapping that everyone kind of talked about RFK increased and looking for crime. It's similar to Hoover in a sense of looking for communists. There seems to be this vendetta or this out to get this certain thing. And I kind of want to ask you about your opinion on what I just said, but also, where do you think RFK's vengeance for the mob came from? His kind of one tunnel vision of focusing on this mafia, angle.
Robert Kennedy was a very moralistic individual. He saw life back then as black and white. You were either good or you were evil. And organized crime, in his view, was the most evil force in the United States. So the moralist in him said, I must go after them, even though his father was warning him not to do this. He had to actually oppose his father in order to declare war on organized crime. But in the pursuit of stopping evil, he believed nothing was off the table other than engaging in the same violence that they did. He did not view espionage as violent. He viewed it as a legitimate tool. And you can argue with that, and others have. but it really was driven by his obsession with getting rid of evil in the United States, and he viewed them as the number one purveyor of evil in everything they did: corruption, murders themselves. He just had no use for them, and infiltrating the labor movement as they did. So it was an obsession that he had, and obsessions cause even good people to get carried away. And as I said in the first episode, I didn't know him then, but everything I know about him and talking to people who knew him, he was driven by. He said when he was asked, "What do you want to be known as?" "I want to be known as the man who stopped the mafia." That's what he wanted to be known as.
Why do you think that was? Do you think he had resentment for maybe some of his father's dealings? I know a lot of people in the political kind of realm that they were in didn't really take the Kennedy brothers seriously or want to give them kind of the time because of the fact that they thought they got in there on. And look, everyone kind of debates this about did they fairly elected all this. Money was involved in every campaign. This has been recorded on like 6 different presidential tapes. They always talk about like everyone gets campaign contributions or uses some type of thing like this to get whatever they want. But talking about the Kennedy brothers, a lot of people didn't really believe that they were the kind of power or kind of club that was going on in the president's kind of sphere at that point because they said that their dad's money got them in or connections or something of this sort. And again, you're the son of someone that was running moonshine and stuff during the Prohibition, and you have resentment for what that was if you're this straight cut person. You want to go after it now, and it means more to you because now everyone's associating your father's actions with you. You now have to clear that up. I mean, just much as LBJ was stuck in Kennedy's shadow for his whole presidency, even after when he got elected and actually elected, not just given the position, he was still stuck in that Kennedy shadow. Every time his name got mentioned, people thought of Dallas. So I wanted to get your kind of thoughts on what you think about the father aspect playing into a lot of RFK's decision making and kind of moving
Yes,
forward.
yes. And Rob, I avoid kind of psychoanalyses as Robert Kennedy himself couldn't deal with questions like this. But I think it's fair to say that he loved his father deeply. He viewed what his father did with their family as being phenomenal for him and for others. Where John and Robert got national attention, you may recall, you wouldn't recall, but some of your listeners and viewers might, was in the hearings of the McClellan Committee on Organized Crime Rackets. And John Kennedy was on that committee. His father didn't want him to be on it, but he was on it. And Robert was the chief counsel. And Robert had firsthand experiences with the mafia leaders in the United States. He grilled them publicly and he got under their nerves. I'll never forget watching his grilling of Sam Giancana, in which he would ask Giancana a question and Giancana would laugh. And on national television, Robert Kennedy looked at Giancana and said, "Only little girls giggle. Why are you giggling?" Can you imagine how that got under the skin of a macho man like Sam Giancana?
I think there's a famous photo of Jimmy Hoffa with his middle finger out, rubbing his eye with his middle finger. But my favorite photo is actually where they have a person in the middle and it's Jack on the left and RFK on the right. And it's like two brothers and they're both looking like RFK is looking with more like a determined, serious look, and JFK is kind of looking at them, just kind of giving like the calm, serious look. And it just shows their personalities so different, but also at the same time, like the brother aspect that they have this connection.
Right, right. I love the grilling that RFK gave to Jimmy Hoffa. The way he would get under Jimmy Hoffa's skin. He accused Hoffa of being a communist. Hoffa went ballistic. And then, he would say, Mr. Hoffa, when you left the hearing, we heard you say you were going to break someone's back. Whose back were you going to break, Mr. Hoffa? And Hoffa would say, figure of speech, figure of speech. The dynamic was high entertainment. The American public was fascinated by those hearings. Now, I mentioned to you with my father, who was, born in Italy, and he was not happy with me when I started working for Robert Kennedy. My father was very objected to the Valachi hearings when Robert Kennedy found a person to kind of talk, violating the mafia Sicilian code word of omerta, which is silence. So he found Valachi, and Valachi put on quite a show. He named names. He took you right inside La Cosa Nostra in vivid detail. The American public was riveted, and my father was not happy. But again, my father finally realized that I did the right thing by working for Robert Kennedy. But the Italian thing was an issue.
Do you believe he understood the ramifications of his actions, RFK, when it came to just investigating and putting the mob on trial like this?
I don't think he realized it at the time. I think in retrospect, after President Kennedy's assassination, one of the things he was concerned about was could he have been responsible for his brother's death because of his war against organized crime? They were definitely one of his suspects in terms of the portfolio of conspiracy subjects. Organized crime was one of them.
Towards the ending of our last conversation, we kind of mentioned the political aspect and why it's important, and looking at kind of these figures as either heroes or some type of identity we put into our politics and our political figures. I kind of wanted to talk to you about the relationship of JFK and RFK. You know, this brother aspect. If you're, in my perspective on politics, the way that I've learned from even the LBJ tapes on and just many conversations and my own experiences, I've kind of learned that there's a president's club. There's like, you can call it the Illuminati, you can call it whatever you want, but it's a group of people that all think the same, benefit off of certain each other's actions. You scratch my back, I scratch your back, and that's kind of how you play ball to get things accomplished. And sometimes you got to grease a couple hands or do a couple things to make sure you get, you know, that position or whatever you want to get past, a bill, anything like that. RFK and JFK's relationship, I think it's David Talbot that has that photo cover of the two brothers together, kind of look like they're talking or engaging in a private conversation. This was a offense to Hoover. Nicholas Katzenbach said in his HSCA testimony, when they were asking about Hoover and how he viewed the Kennedy brothers, he stated that I don't think Hoover's ever been in a position where he was second to the president. Like he never felt like he was the right hand of the president. He felt like he was like the right shoe. And it was just interesting to hear Katzenbach say that because a lot of JFK conspiracy people hate Katzenbach or say he's part of the conspiracy or whatever because he gave the memo about Hoover eliminating any. That's an order. You're doing an order. You listen to Katzenbach's HSCA memo. He has the best explanation of RFK I've ever heard. He's had so many good, deep, real answers that kind of make you go, I don't think I can hate this guy because it seems like he's just a person doing his job and he had his own opinions, but when he was asked to do something, he had to do it.
Well, I think Robert Kennedy and his brother had a remarkable relationship that grew over the years. As the young brother, he was always under his other brother's shadows, and he was the object of teasing and ridicule. And growing up in a big family, that's not uncommon. But he also had Robert Kennedy was a bit sensitive when sometimes President Kennedy would tease him. In fact, when President Kennedy announced that Robert was his choice for Attorney General, he kind of made light of it. He said, I think Bobby needs a little bit more practice before he goes into becoming a lawyer. And Robert was very hurt by that. And when President Kennedy said to him, I was just teasing, he said, yeah, but you were teasing me. And so there was a little bit of that. But once President Kennedy was in office and went through the Bay of Pigs, he concluded from that, I need my brother with me on everything. He's the only one I trust. And he would say to his aides, if Bobby had been part of the deliberations on the Bay of Pigs, it would never have happened. So that was the evolution of their relationship to the point where John thought Robert was indispensable and Robert would do anything for his brother. So it was a remarkable relationship.
One of these things we mentioned in the last episode was RFK continuing the Castro plots or doing them without JFK's knowing. Point to your perspective on it where that wouldn't be true is the fact that the mob was running so many casinos and stuff in Cuba. And if you're best trying to attack the mob, it would not be about trying to assassinate Castro, who's trying to get rid of the mob out of Cuba. Now you're helping or aiding their goals, the mob's goals, which is the opposite of where RFK would view things. Just again, it's confusing. Documents constantly. There's like, it seems like every document you find, there's the opposite somewhere along the mix as just misinformation, which they did all the time. They put that out there. That's factually known. The FBI and CIA did that back then and probably still do it now.
When Robert found out that the CIA had been collaborating with organized crime, he found this out from a guy named Lawrence Houston who briefed him on it. He was livid. He just couldn't believe that his government, our government, was in cahoots with evil. And he said something, he was careful in his choice of words, and sometimes being so careful, it raised the wrong conclusion. What he said to Houston was, if you ever consider collaborating again with organized crime, as Attorney General, I should know it. That's a lot different from saying you shouldn't even consider it. So that phrase has often been misused by people to implicate Robert Kennedy in the ongoing attempts on Castro's life. The fact of the matter is he had nothing to do with it, didn't want that done. And as he said to others afterward, I saved Castro's life. And that was my conclusion in all the deep research that I've done on the attempts to kill Fidel Castro.
Where do you think his blame is when it came with MLK? Because he kind of gets lumped in that as much as Hoover does, which doesn't really seem fair. Because by the time I'm listening to some of the LBJ tapes, he's talking about the Justice Department, and LBJ actually did a good job at defending the Justice Department. He told Katzenbach, like with the Walter Jenkins incident. I'll ask you about that because there's a connection with RFK there as well too. Walter Jenkins, RFK's comment on it was like, "Don't say too much." Let the things play out, kind of this whole aspect of just handling it and getting over it and then moving on to the next thing. RFK is an attorney general. When you examine his record or you examine him in that role, there is not a resemblance of hatred towards LBJ. There is nothing but a man doing his professional duty. Now, if you can bring up an example, I'd like to hear one. But there's been so many instances where there's no issues on the phone. There's no arguing. There's no saying no. There's none of this. LBJ talks about going to RFK about so many decisions, even with the Warren Commission, establishing Earl Warren as the head of the Warren Commission. That wasn't LBJ. RFK went to him 2 times because LBJ asked. And he was like, no, I'm not doing it. Earl Warren didn't want to do it. He said, I don't want to be in charge of this thing. I knew Kennedy personally. I'm sorry for your loss, but at the same time, it's going to hurt me and I'm going to end up messing up my duty. And LBJ had to use J. Edgar Hoover to blackmail him about a little incident in Mexico City. I have that clip of that phone call on there. And a lot of people, that was like the first time they heard it. It's interesting. But again, this is something where it's like, I don't see him saying, I'm not doing that. I'm the head of the Justice Department. I'm not going to, you get Hoover of the FBI to do it, whatever, do his investigation.
Yeah. The best word to describe the Johnson RFK relationship is complexity. And the problem is Johnson and RFK had distinctly different versions of all major events. An example, you brought this up last time on the Air Force One flight back from Dallas. Johnson told his swearing in as something that Robert Kennedy insisted on. And Robert Kennedy said, no. In fact, Johnson called me and said, I have to get sworn in right away. Tell me what I have to do. Who can give me the oath? And Robert Kennedy's reaction was, what's the rush? He didn't get it. So here you have two people with the same event having diametrically opposed interpretations of exactly what happened. And again, I try to be balanced because I developed my own animosity toward Johnson for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being the Vietnam War. But President Kennedy said to Robert and others many times, Johnson lies even when he doesn't have to. It's an innate trait of Lyndon Johnson to lie. And anyone who dealt with him concluded that that was just part of his DNA, is not being able to tell the truth. And he didn't tell the American people the truth about Vietnam. It was pervasive, an unwillingness to tell the truth. And to me, that was one of the real problems in his relationship with both President Kennedy and with Robert Kennedy.
I told you I was going to try and sway you from that perspective of Johnson, and I'm going to do that. Johnson wasn't the only one that said that about RFK, telling him he needs to be sworn in, though. And it's funny because if you talk about the ticket for LBJ being offered the vice presidential spot, RFK flatly denies it in multiple news articles that get printed. He states, he goes, I don't know where that came from. He goes, I don't know why people kept saying we were using Bobby Baker. Because also, Bobby Baker, the money aspect of that, some of that went to the Kennedys as well, too. RFK actually got Hoover to try and help squash some of this and got the he didn't get brought in until after, when it started blowing up for real after Walter Jenkins incident. Bobby Baker's investigation started. He got Hoover, and then he started investigating it. He says that in Times, he says that in Newsweek, he says that in all these different things. So do we believe the public statement, or do we trust the kind of rumoring around the private aspect of it, because I have four people that said RFK told Johnson he needed to be sworn in, people that were on Air Force One. So I'm just, again, I'm not saying you're wrong. This is what makes it hard about history to understand, because I started in JFK. I appreciate RFK. Those two are I hold higher than Johnson, but it's hard because I can't be trying to make up my own history or what version I like the most. I have to follow where I'm seeing certain statements and following what was said, when was said what, and seeing who I can eliminate or look at as probably being. And again, I got more people saying that RFK told LBJ to be sworn in. But again, that's the Bobby Baker stuff. That's the ticket, the 61 ticket, the scandals. That's everybody blames Johnson, saying that Johnson killed Kennedy and the scandals dropped once he took the presidency, because the Kennedys were bringing that out. RFK flatly denied that multiple times. So do I trust him on that?
Yeah. To go back to the Air Force One conversation, I think the best corroborating witness for RFK's version is Nick Katzenbach. Because RFK said to Nick, Johnson is claiming he has to be sworn in. Do you know what's involved? The best answer to what really happened would have been the tapes of the recordings, and they don't exist. At least I know no one is able to find the tapes of that trip back from Dallas to Washington. All the calls that were being made, so many rumors. One of the rumors was the first thing Johnson did was call his stockbroker and sold all his stocks because he felt the market would crash. That ride is loaded with folklore as to what really happened. Johnson's behavior, terrible stories about Johnson's behavior that William Manchester went into in his book Death of a President. So yeah, anything that involved LBJ and RFK was fraught with two different versions. And but I will say this: Robert Kennedy in October of 1963 was looking deeply into Lyndon Johnson's financial transactions as part of his investigation into Billy Saul Estes, who was a very interesting character. Robert Kennedy asked Billy Saul Estes, "Would you cooperate in providing evidence against Johnson? And I'll do what I can to shorten your long prison sentence." He's just been convicted for fraud. And Billy Saul Estes said, "If I were to do that, I would be a dead man." Imagine that.
There was just back to the Air Force One comment. If you listen to Malcolm Kildup's interviews that he's got on he's got so many oral histories, and then there's a few others that were riding on Air Force One. I could actually send them to you. I have them on my channel. I have actually a couple of them to play, but they kind of give you everything before, like from Parkland to Air Force One, and then on Air Force One, and then there are phone calls. So the first phone call Johnson made was to JFK's parents. So there are phone calls of that, and also trying to patch through with the White House Situation Room, um, to call Joseph and then to call JFK's mother. And Johnson talked to both of them, and it's hard because it's like scratchy because you hear the plane engines roaring in the background. But he's like, "I'm so sorry," and he did the same thing when Bobby died. He called Ted Kennedy as well too. Those were his first few phone calls. Wasn't a stockbroker or anything, but it was interesting to hear those, because it's like, why would you have so much hate towards a person and then call their parents? People then use the excuse like he's rubbing it into them, and I'm like, I don't know if it's that. I mean, this is someone who has kids of his own. From everything I've heard from, again, say Johnson, he does lie on occasions, but also RFK lies too on occasions. He's been known to use his way of getting something done by also using the voices of others. And when I said that was by mentioning certain things, like for instance with Katzenbach, saying that Johnson says this. Well, he could have been him that said it, but he's just using Johnson wants this done because he's the president, and overall the president has the overall say. That's not just RFK. That's everybody in that political sphere was using someone else's name to back up their point or what they wanted. And again, I'm not saying RFK is a bad guy. I'm looking at the examination of when did we actually start to get the tension? When did this all start to engross out? And kind of looking through again, I don't believe in Camelot. I believe everyone has faults, but I think admitting to them, like JFK did with the Bay of Pigs, or things that weren't his problems, and took the blunt force of it and the ramifications of it, is something that's very respectable of a politician, and that's what I look for. But LBJ did some stuff with the Vietnam War thing. And it stemmed out of articles and rumors and stuff like that that he was blaming the Kennedys. And he stated in multiple phone calls and tried to chase that source down from Joseph Alsop was the one, and John McCone as well too. They stated that the whole Vietnam War thing was really Johnson's blunder, and it's just something landed in Johnson's lap. Everyone does blame him. Again, he took most of the years of it, but he's not. That's I don't know how you could win a war. He asked everybody that question. He's like, I asked RFK, what do I do? I can't retreat. What do you want me to do? And then no one had an answer. It was just get out of Vietnam. He's like, how? Just teach me, tell me how, and we'll do it. But I again, back to RFK, that whole thing of using someone else's what they said, just he did that with Hoover, constantly with Hoover. Hoover wants this done, and everyone's afraid of Hoover. They didn't even question. But LBJ did the same thing.
Yeah, as I said in the first episode, Rob, there are no saints here. It's different degrees of sinners. But Robert Kennedy, again, I knew him at a different point. I didn't see a person who was capable of lying. If anything, he was too truthful in some areas. Yeah. But let me you talk about the animosity and how it started. And I told the story about Robert Kennedy being on the LBJ rants. By the way, there's an apocryphal story I have not been able to prove, but I could see it happening. Apparently, Robert Kennedy shows up at the ranch, and Johnson says to him, Sonny Boy, he used to call him Sonny Boy. I mean, right away, lack of disrespect, right? Oh, Sonny Boy, my ranch, I can get in my car at 6 a.m, and I wouldn't get to the end of my ranch till 6 p.m. And Robert Kennedy said to him, I once had a lousy car like that. Can you imagine again? Just now, I can't prove that happened. I don't have, but I can see it happening, right? Johnson being patronizing and Robert being a wise guy. So right away there's bad blood. But let me give you something
Well,
again.
to that point, that does sound like a lot like their relationship. If you mentioned the funny thing about JFK teasing RFK about the Attorney General nomination, that's brothers in general. If you have an older sibling, I do. It's teasing like that, and I hate it. Trust me. But also Johnson tried to fill that slot as well too. He mentions a lot when he's talking about RFK, whether it's an action RFK did or something like that. He became a little bit vengeful in 64, 65, just with the press. He states like the brother relationship that he was trying to fill something. He felt like he lost something very important to him, which RFK did. And I think Johnson just his Texas sense of humor, and no offense to Texas, I'm not saying that at all, but it's blunt back then, especially to people from Washington and New York that have this kind of different lifestyle than maybe what they have in the South or how things work back there. And his gallbladder surgery, pulling up his scars and showing it, people called it this horrible thing. And then he held a beagle's ears up when he was kissing it on the face, and everyone was saying that he was like holding a beagle by its ears, and it became this whole blown up story. And Johnson's like, "Oh my God, I love my dogs." Like what? And it's again, that's the Texas not understanding how we view our presidents. It's been the main thing for me that I've had to kind of go past. When I first heard JFK curse on the phone, I was like, what? And I was like, oh yeah, they're people. People curse. People do things. There's the professional side we see. So let's not get shocked when we find out certain things about individuals.
Yes, but let me tell you another thing. This would be probably a more vivid example of why Robert found Johnson repulsive. That's another word I think I use carefully. Johnson was telling people a story about growing up in Texas, that there was a cross-eyed boy. And the thought was the boy was cross-eyed because his parents were bad. And this was God's punishment to the parents. And then Johnson would tell the story, and then he would call Robert Kennedy our cross-eyed boy. I mean, can you imagine? And this gets back to Robert Kennedy, and he can't believe Johnson is talking like this. And the implication from that Johnson would say the Kennedy administration was running a murder incorporated, and divine retribution is why President Kennedy died. That was a theme of Johnson's stories about President Kennedy. This gets back to Robert Kennedy. He can't believe this. So again, put yourself in Robert Kennedy's shoes, And you've got to wonder, what is this guy talking about? And it deteriorated. The longer that Robert Kennedy dealt with Lyndon Johnson, the Cuban Missile Crisis is another example. Johnson, during the ex-com meetings of the Cuban Missile Crisis, never said a word. He's in the room, and he never says a word. President Kennedy says to Robert, "What's wrong with Johnson? Where does he stand?" And they agreed that President Kennedy should not attend the next meeting of the ex-com. Sure enough, Kennedy doesn't attend, and Johnson speaks for the first time. And what does Johnson say? This goes back to a kind of a Texas caricature. Johnson says, "If there's a snake on my ranch, I take my boot, I slam it down, and cut off the snake's head." So he put himself in the category of, we got to get rid of Castro. He wouldn't say that when President Kennedy was in the room. He only said it when President Kennedy was out of the room. So it's things like that that color my view of Johnson in a very, very negative way.
Do you believe that was a sign of just betrayal or difference of opinion when it came with JFK, or do you believe that he states in a phone call, "I have never disagreed with the Kennedys," publicly? Well, hold on decisions that were supposed to be made, he said, "I agreed with Kennedy on all of them. I told him the Bay of Pigs was a bad idea, but I supported him anyway." He supported Kennedy on every decision that he made, on every decision he decided to do something. So him being quiet in the room is not necessarily, he's kind of being honest to his point. He supports the decision. Not making a statement or saying anything is silent support. It's not, if he was going to voice his opinion, then he'd be lying if he tried to be like, "It's a great idea," which again is, I think it's where we understand kind of the more inner layers of Johnson when you listen to his phone calls and what he reveals. And you're like, oh, I saw this and I thought this. And then you hear from his perspective or what's going on in his head. And again, he's not a saint, not saying that at all. But I was just examining it more from that aspect. And I'll play that clip when we get to the clip parts more towards the end.
No, publicly, he was a loyal vice president. You got to give him credit for that. Never voiced opposition publicly, but privately, he made it clear that I don't see eye to eye with the president on a lot of things. But, I'm vice president. I got to go along. So he let the word get out in inner circles that he didn't agree with with how President Kennedy was handling Cuba, didn't agree how he was handling Vietnam. Even back then, Johnson thought we should be going in, not with advisors, but with troops. So, but publicly he maintained loyalty, which you got to tip your hat to him for that.
I think it's what any vice president is supposed to do, I guess, maintain kind of supporting the president's decision. I actually have that interesting interview I mentioned on the first episode with George Reedy, where he talks about the president's power. I think you'll agree with it. Like for me, that like resonates more than anything I've ever heard anybody explain about the presidency, about like the position and kind of the power of it. Like the president says no once, and then everything after that will be completely in support of whatever decision he's going to make. And again, that's where we get faults with Vietnam. Everyone telling LBJ he's doing the right thing and just saying the mockingbird opinion when someone should have just said, "Hey, don't." It wasn't wait until later in the game when, he's going up for, I don't even think he was going to run again. It was like 68-ish. He was talking about like, I don't, what do you want me to do? And like, everyone's like, "Get out." And he's like, "Well, all your opinions in the beginning were the complete opposite." And again, I don't think it's all the others to blame for Vietnam. Johnson was a part of that. But overall, when you look at the relationship between the Kennedy brothers and then you look at Johnson, he did carry on their civil rights. He did carry on a lot of other things, whether he used that for polling purposes. I mean, there's evidence to support that. A lot of people, I think like 40% of a lot of the polls were saying that they were with Johnson because he was keeping up the polls. But again, it's a mixed bag. Like I said, it's all sharing perspectives and just different information that we both looked at. I'm kind of interested. Why would he, if he had this contentious relationship, why wouldn't he just reverse all the Kennedy stuff or stop all of it? Why did he decide to push it through?
Well, I'll give you an example of what he did. President Kennedy had an executive order. So it was a national security action memorandum indicating very clearly that we were going to be withdrawing our presence in Vietnam. One of the first acts Johnson did was to revoke that order.
That 263?
Yep. That was his first act. In January 64, he said to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, "You get me reelected, you're going to have your war." So he clearly had a different view of Vietnam than President Kennedy did. He wanted to go all out, all in. But there's an irony here too. Talking about being vice president, Johnson said, "I detested every minute of being vice president." And remember, there was this issue of should Robert Kennedy be his running mate in 1964. And Johnson ruled out all members of his cabinet as a pretense for ruling out Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy was really upset. He really thought he could have helped Johnson. The thought of Robert Kennedy as Lyndon Johnson's vice president, to me, I'm dumbfounded by that thought. And later on, Robert Kennedy admitted that was the best thing that never happened to him,
Hey,
being
maybe
Johnson's
then we'll
vice
see
president.
LBJ get assassinated and RFK becomes the president on that situation. Now, I think when you're looking at that whole kind of thing, Johnson didn't need to name other members of his cabinet that didn't even want the position or weren't even up for the position. He did that to soften the blow towards RFK. Now, again, you can say that could be because of RFK's anger or kind of back attacks that could come later towards just being denied because RFK felt owed that vice presidential spot. He thought that was his spot. You know, after the things with his brother and Johnson taking over, he thought that vice president position was his. And he ghosted Johnson for a couple of days. We talked about in the first episode. And again, that whole thing, he's messaging and talking to people on the phone. Johnson is Clark Clifford, others, and he's saying, you know, I feel so bad. You know, I just don't want this to hurt RFK. I don't want this to damage him. I don't want him to feel like, he was robbed of something. There's phone calls like that where I just go, man, you could say he's lying, but it's literally along the same theme between various different individuals. And I'm like, I don't know if you could keep that up because I've heard plenty of things where I'm like, dude, you recorded that. And he was more than happy to. I don't think he cared. So I think when it comes to that, you're seeing an honest reflection of how he felt. And he probably understood a lot of what probably RFK was going through. And then felt like there was going to be ramifications because he does state that in a phone call with Bill Moyers. There will be ramifications of some of this. And around that time, you start seeing articles coming out about Johnson's financial situations, family stuff, and other things start to arise. And then a little bit later on, you see the Manchester book, which was supposed to be Jackie's biography. She hired someone, William Manchester, to write this Death of a President book. And apparently, when Johnson contacted her and had her remove some of the things because she didn't know what was going on, and she looked and saw all this stuff that was being said about Johnson, she wanted to remove it. And RFK and another individual, I don't remember who the name was. I don't think it was Ted. It was somebody else was wanting to keep a lot of that stuff in there, the super stuff like the stories and the Johnson doing this and that. And again, it makes it difficult because some of the things Manchester wrote weren't true and they haven't been validated. And the only way we can honestly provide that it was true are the Manchester tapes, and that's sealed in the JFK documents until 2075.
Oh, by the way, Manchester wanted to interview Johnson. Johnson refused. So he had every opportunity to provide his perspective. He refused. Now, he ended up answering pages of questions, some of them in writing, and those have never been divulged either. But let me go back to the vice presidency thing, because I think it shows you another perspective of Johnson. When Johnson met with Robert Kennedy, he told him, I'm not going to have you as my vice president. And then he wanted Robert to issue a statement indicating it was like a mutual agreement. And Robert Kennedy said, no, I can't do that. Johnson called in members of the press off the record afterward, and he imitated Robert Kennedy's reaction to him during that meeting and made fun of Robert Kennedy. And of course, that got back to Robert Kennedy. And the reaction was, that was so unnecessary to be making fun of me as you're telling me you're not going to be my running mate. So that was the other aspect of Johnson. Jackie Kennedy had an interesting relationship with Johnson, too, because Johnson was trying to be so nice to her. But when asked to describe Johnson bluntly, her answer, two-faced. That was Jackie's assessment of Lyndon Johnson. And I guess I'm consistent with that narrative. Johnson would be really two different Johnsons on a lot of things, depending on who he was catering to. And I think the way he handled the vice presidency for RFK was an illustration of that.
Again, I agree with that interpretation of Johnson, but I also agree with that interpretation with RFK as well, too, Two-Face. Again, he was one person in certain eyes and another person in another. Um, a lot of the stuff, like even with calling Jackie Johnson did, he's on the phone saying, "I love you. I hope you know we love you. I want you to come by and see me at the White House." And he's saying this all over, and he sounds like he might have had a drink. And she's like, "Oh, I'll come down there eventually. It's so nice for you to write me a letter from the president." And kind of seems like she's flirting a little bit back, but really she's just being hospitable, like she's just being nice. But Johnson said something that kind of disgusted me, which was saying that you can tell how are the boys doing, hope they have a Merry Christmas, and tell them that I'll be their new daddy. He says that to Jackie, and I thought that was very distasteful. And again, I'm not saying Johnson's a saint. I'm just kind of enlightening a kind of a different perspective that a lot of people in the Kennedy aspect have not looked at. Like when I first started, I didn't examine anything Johnson really related besides that intersected with the Kennedys and like the Bobby Baker stuff. RFK dismissed that as just people that were loyal to Jack and Kennedy people that started blowing that scandal out there. He said that in a Time magazine. So that was his public interview. So again, it makes it hard to understand if I don't know the rumors and the stuff. But you mentioned like even with talking about Jackie involved in all of this as well too. He called Jackie like all the time, just talking to her and saying, "Hey, I hope you know we care about you." Got her, what was it, the extra $100,000 a year for mail that gets sent to the president's wife, or that whole thing that her job was, or her thing that she was given during the White House. You didn't
I think it
have
was
to
50,
do
I
that.
think it was 50,000, but it was a significant amount of
Well,
money.
she started with 50,000, added 100,000. You had to call John McCormick and I think two other people. I'm kind of 98% sure on that. I just from what the tape is, they might have lessened it in the historical record of it. But that was something he thought that needed to happen. And again, the Secret Service protection of vice presidential or presidential candidates that came after RFK's death. We don't have the phone call with Ethel. That's the one thing I want to hear in '68 when the day RFK was killed. I want to hear that phone call with Ethel because we have the Ted Kennedy one, and Ted's upset. But at this point, I hate to say it, but Ted was drinking, and I think a lot of people know this historically about Ted Kennedy, but he didn't have much of a reaction to like his brother dying. And I was kind of like, well, that's weird. I mean, were you were a little bit more upset on the JFK phone call you got in '63, but by '68 he just seemed numb and kind of didn't really respond as much as Johnson reacted to. But Johnson said, "I'm sorry again." And then he also called I think, yeah, Joseph Sr. He called Joseph Sr., but at this time he was in a wheelchair and was really kind of going downhill.
Yeah. By the way, from Air Force One, I don't think he called President Kennedy's father. He definitely called Rose, and Lady Bird was on with him. But I'd be interested if you have that calling his father. I didn't think he did. Um, he also agreed to Jackie's request to rename Cape Canaveral Cape Kennedy. Got it done right away. So no, there were things he was trying to do to soothe Jackie's pain, but he did it in many ways in a very coarse way. That when you do listen to the tapes, I cringed when I listened to them, just how he was dealing with her. But his style, was clearly not the same style as we East Coast folks used to. And that was Johnson. He wasn't going to change his style. Um, his nickname was Cornpone among the Kennedy folks, Colonel Cornpone. And that was, and by the way, President Kennedy wouldn't tolerate any of that. He would never tolerate insulting Johnson, even in private meetings. So he was he was sensitive about Johnson's feelings. But the Bobby Baker thing, by the way, in 1960, Bobby Baker, Lyndon Johnson, John Connally were putting out all this negative stuff about John Kennedy to stop him from getting the nomination. They brought up his Addison's disease. They brought up the father's relationship with Chamberlain in terms of Hitler. They accused Joe Kennedy of being anti-Semitic. They were spreading all this venom. And Robert confronted them. And he said, I'm aware of all this garbage you're putting out. And someday you're going to pay the price. That was what Robert said to them. So it brought out the worst in Robert, too, in terms of threatening them. But they were engaged in a despicable campaign, an ad hominem attack on John Kennedy that was designed to get Lyndon the nomination. And of course, it didn't work.
What do you think about the ongoing press battle that LBJ and RFK were kind of going through? Eventually, when the Manchester book starts arising, you start seeing Johnson say, "Give me every transcript" with Jackie Kennedy. give me every transcript with RFK. He's now at the point where I'm tired of like dealing with this over and over again, and I'm just going to put an end to it. Meaning, in the sense of I'm going to show the proof or show my own innocence in all of this, and then I'm going to start putting them under the bus. Because Johnson had the vengeful side, much as RFK had that. Johnson was a little bit more forgiving on certain things for the longest time. It seemed like he was dealing with press issues about his finances being published and stuff, and he was more about countering it and stopping that ball from rolling and ruining his reelection process. But when he supported in the New York Senate race, or I think it's that. I have to find the clip for it. He supported RFK, but then he complained about RFK not being there to support him or give his say. And he calls RFK like a little shit or something. He calls him something derogative because of the fact that how are you not going to be there after I supported you and did this? And he took that as an offense. But again, it's these little digs, these little slight things where I'm like, you're looking at it, you're like, I can see both perspectives. It's not like either one of them is being innocent in this. They're both kind of being attacking each other, whether one thinks they did the first blow and the other one thinks they didn't.
During the New York Senate campaign, I was not involved in it other than as a person observing what was happening. Johnson spent a couple of days campaigning with Robert Kennedy throughout New York, upstate, downstate, and he even took time to meet with Jackie at her apartment in Manhattan. Johnson made sure that he spent time with Jackie. Um, and then when Robert Kennedy was elected, that night he gave a victory speech, and he never mentioned Johnson. And that got back to Johnson. He was very upset. After I went out and campaigned for you, you didn't mention me. So, and you could look back on it and say it would have been nice of Robert Kennedy, as he was thanking everyone, to thank Lyndon Johnson, but he did not.
Yeah, but how hard is that in the moment as well, too, to like, I don't know, think about thanking every single person, like when you see a actor winning a Grammy or something like that. But I guess Johnson thought he was the one that should have been like the main top of the list type deal when it came to his name being mentioned. Again, I don't know. I feel like I've just like, thank you to everybody and thank God, or, just whatever everybody always says, because there's so many dang names. You'll sit there forever trying to name them all.
There was a strain of humor in their rivalry as well, and one of them I loved. Robert Kennedy would tell the story that he would get mail from the White House to him in Washington, and he was in the Robert Kennedy's office was in the Senate office building, and the mail from the White House would be to Robert F. Kennedy and abbreviated the Senate office building SOB. And Robert Kennedy would tell that story, and he got a kick out of it to show how he was being viewed by Johnson. So he was able to kind of joke a little bit about it. There was another example during the presidential campaign when someone said to Robert Kennedy, is there any way that you and Lyndon Johnson can collaborate more? And Kennedy said, look, I support a coalition government in Vietnam, not in the United States. So he was able to just alleviate some of the difficulties with a good sense of humor.
I am looking at the clip. It looks like, yeah, it was LBJ, Lady Bird, and Rose Kennedy. So, yeah, pardon my correction for the Joseph. Now, there is a clip also that I will probably put up right now, but it's Be Proud of Your Boys, LBJ, Joe Kennedy Sr., and Ann Gargan on 5/11/64, where he's talking about the Kennedy boys and his
Yes,
sons.
He praised Robert and Ted to his father, to their father. Yes.
Which again, I mean, I don't know a whole lot of people that would go out of their way to do that for anything. I don't think even as nice as Yarborough was, you wouldn't see Yarborough calling certain individuals. And again, Yarborough was broken up by the assassination too. There's a lot of issues with that, but also the relationship with LBJ became super close. Yarborough called LBJ so many times just to be able to talk about certain issues and stuff like that. And I think even with the Bobby Baker stuff, there was kind of a slight just or kind of rumor that Yarborough was receiving this money from Bobby Baker. And Yarborough was, or not Yarborough, LBJ was like, Yarborough's not that stupid. Like he literally mentioned, like he kind of covers him. And I'm like, well, it's funny because the fight at Air Force or Love Field, everyone always mentions was about where Connolly was going to sit. LBJ wanted Connolly to sit with him, or JFK wanted Connolly to sit with him. It was really about where Yarborough was going to be. Allegedly, LBJ says the feud was between Connolly and Yarborough. And Connolly states in his HSCA testimony it was between Yarborough and Johnson. But again, they ended up riding. Yarborough had Johnson in his car, Like it's that type whole situation where I'm like, I don't know. It was a feud between one of you Texas boys that Yarborough didn't want to ride with. But again, there's a lot of things like for the longest time, people wondered what that fight was about. And it was like he didn't want Johnson or Connolly in the car because he knew bullets were going to hit JF. Again, it's bringing context to the whole situation. But I wanted to share some of these clips that
Yes,
we've been
please,
talking
please.
about. And again, I can pause it and we can talk about it. So, because I'm sure maybe they're new to you, and they're all interesting. Like I said, I love doing this as like I wouldn't say side project, but I like going through these and learning more about kind of history from just these perspectives. And again, there's another whole perspective from the other side as well too, or from other people's eyes. But this
Yes.
is the phone call from Air Force One on 11/23/63 with LBJ, Lady Bird, and Rose Kennedy. Now the sound quality might be a little bad because again, they are flying in the air.
I'm reading you loud and clear. I have Mrs. Kennedy standing by. Are you ready with volunteer? Go ahead.
Yes, we're ready. Can you put her on and I'll turn her over to him? Over.
Roger, Roger. She's coming on now. AF1 from Crown. Mrs. Kennedy on. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mrs. Kennedy. Hello, Mrs. Kennedy. We're talking from the airplane. Can you hear us all right? Over.
Thank you. Hello.
Yes, Mrs. Kennedy. I have Mr. Johnson for you here.
Yes, thank you.
Miss Kennedy?
Yes. Yes, 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 Mr. President. Yes.
I wish to God there was something that I could do, and I wanted to tell you that we were grieving with you.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know you love Jack and he loves you.
Miss Kennedy, we feel like we just had a...
Yes. All right.
We're glad that the nation had the son
Yes.
long as it did.
Yes, well, thank you, Lady Bird. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Love and prayers to all of you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Again, did Johnson have to do that? For me, I don't know. That speaks a little bit more volumes. Just like, I don't know how many people, and a lot of people use this again for the conspiracy aspect, saying he was rubbing it in her face or he wanted to be the one to break the news. It doesn't seem, to me, again, not even disclosing about the Kennedys or who was right and wrong, just an aspect of like a different side than what we technically see in like Robert Caro's books or anybody that writes about Johnson in like an unfavorable light. Again, Seth Kanner did the same thing, which made me even start questioning his whole viewpoint of Ruby, all this other stuff. Because again, you're saying one thing, and then I find out in the books a lot of the stuff like that's what everyone goes off of now, like the Yarborough fight. A lot of people were just going off of the Connolly sitting in the car type thing, and it's like, well, that's not necessarily true at all.
Yeah. It was interesting, though, the person who said, I have Mr. Johnson on the line, and Rose called him Mr. President. That was, I thought, very telling. I guess you can't. One of the traps in doing research into those years were how literal should you be? And let me give you a couple of examples because I think that these have been interpreted as saying, okay, Jacqueline Kennedy and John Connolly knew something. When Lady Bird said to Jackie on the plane, don't you want to change your clothes? And Jackie said, no, I want them to see what they've done to him. And in the limousine, when the shooting starts, Connolly says, my God, they're going to kill us all. That one word, they, right, has been magnified as indicating that it's clear those two people thought this was a group thing. Now, to me, it was just a sense of that's what you say. Is that what you really meant? But even words, when they were interpreted so literally, feed this notion that people knew this was more than a one-person operation.
Again, yeah, I'm agree with you on that. I don't know if it was that was him saying, "Oh my God, there's definitely multiple shooters." I mean, you can make that argument because it probably Connolly only said he heard 2 shots. He never heard the one that hit him. So again, it's difficult. It could have sounded like a barrage. It could sound like his shots were coming from everywhere, especially if you believe the magic bullet went through his. I'm sure to him, he was like, I got shot twice. Like I could feel it in my back and at the same time in my wrist and all. He's probably thinking he's being caught in a crossfire, which is what a lot of people stated that were witnesses in Dealey Plaza that were involved in that motorcade. I think
Yes,
it's
but
Bobby Hargis, the one that was the
yeah, the
motorcycle
motorcycle
driver.
driver. Yeah,
He
yeah,
got blood on the front of his
yeah, yeah,
visor
yeah.
and skull bits. And now he was on the back left of the limousine. So that means a shot had to come from the front because if it came from behind, blood would have went forward instead of going, back and hitting him.
The other interpretation of Connolly's statement was he's saying, "My God, they weren't supposed to kill me. They're going to kill us all." So, you don't, in that moment, who knows what was going through his mind.
Now, I believe when you're looking at conspiracy and the Kennedy assassination, I think there's 100% evidence in fact of a cover up. There's way too much. What a lot of people point as conspiracy is the cover up aspect. Doesn't mean that there necessarily, a lot of people were just trying to get this out of the way. And a lot of people did prescribe to the domino theory. But Connolly also, he was more than happy to blame things on the Secret Service, and the Secret Service was more than happy to take the blame off themselves, even though everybody was at fault there. Connolly was in charge of where they were going to have the luncheon, whether there's going to be the women's or the trademark, all this type of stuff. He wanted to have it the women's thing, but he was also caring about his reelection or his campaign. So he didn't bother going towards anything when it came to dealing with the actual route himself. He had his underlings work for him and do the route, and he didn't even talk with them about it. And he stated that to the HSCA. It makes him look very, very bad. But I go, oh, dude, you weren't even caring about what was going to be happening in Dallas. And I think Kilduff states that I was so against the Dallas trip just because with the issue with Adlai Stevenson and all this other stuff. And from Connolly's perspective, and he is a Texas boy, so you have to understand he's probably going to defend a lot of his hometown or whatever his, it's like home field advantage. You got a team loyalty to that. But he also states on the drive that there was really no negative signs. He thought it was weird that JFK kept mentioning to Jackie to take her sunglasses off. He looked over like 3 or 4 times and Jackie had her sunglasses back on. He's like, take your glasses off, Jackie. The people need to see you. And she's like, it's bright. I can't see. So again, there was that little kind of awkwardness, but they didn't really talk. And then he looked over and saw from a balcony someone that says, Dallas wants you to go home, JFK. And he talks about looking forward and hoping the president didn't see that. And then John Kennedy just responded, you see that sign back there? And then Connolly said, I was hoping you didn't, sir. And he goes, you think that's a nice man up there? And then it was just a laugh along the car. Then next thing you know, they took that turn, and that's when shots rang out a few moments later. So again, it's these little interesting tidbits and detail you can believe or not believe, depending on if it just makes the story sound better. But overall, the HSCA's investigation, it proves faults on a lot of people. Even the Dallas police, funny, Jack Revel of the Dallas police actually admits to it. He states, like, do you think that the Dallas police did their job properly? And he goes, did our job properly? The man got killed. We were supposed to protect Oswald for the transfer. He got killed. We obviously many faults on the Dallas police side, so we take full responsibility for that. And I go, damn, that's the first person I've ever heard in history, besides JFK and the Bay of Pigs, start taking responsibility for their actions, which again brings more weight to their testimony. Sorry for that rant. I wanted to.
No. But the genesis of the Dallas trip itself is mired in mystery. President Kennedy blamed Johnson for not controlling Texas politics and needing him to go to the rescue. He really blamed Johnson for that. Johnson himself was not deeply involved in the planning of the trip, as you know. It was all Connolly, Kenny O'Donnell, a guy I got to know very well in Robert Kennedy's office named Jerry Bruno. He was the advance man. One of my favorite characters, a great character. So there was even that, who wanted President Kennedy to go to Texas and why? And again, you got disputes saying President Kennedy insisted he wanted to go to Texas. And yet you have other evidence saying that Johnson and Connolly begged him to come because they needed him to bail them out of the mess they were in. But there's so much irony too. There's a tape recording of President Kennedy and John Connolly. I think it's in 1962. And by the way, President Kennedy did not like John Connolly. Jackie really didn't like him. She couldn't stand him. And they're having this conversation about the results, presidential election results. And President Kennedy says to Connolly, we carried Texas, but we got killed in Dallas. Can you imagine that? The irony of that statement that was made in the earlier 60s.
Do you know the show what is it? Oh God, it's with Mark Rupert, Americans Untold Stories, I think it's
Oh,
called.
yes. Yes, yes,
They
yes, yes.
mentioned one of my clips and they gave me a shout out, which I appreciate for, but it was a tape I found. I don't think a lot of people have heard before, but it was John Connolly and LBJ talking about going to Texas for, the election and kind of raise votes and morale and stuff like this. And Johnson didn't want to go and he wanted to kind of cancel the dinner and everything like that. And Connolly's talking to him like, why do you want to cancel the dinner? He goes, because everyone's just associating us with like this, John, Kennedy's assassination and all this other type of stuff. And it was bumming him out. And it's funny you mentioned that the El Paso trip was really where the idea for Texas stemmed from. And Connolly actually had a meeting with JFK without LBJ. And I think a lot of the reasoning for that was because he thought he could get a more of an honest, what Connolly thought would be a good idea rather than having LBJ, who was kind of like, oh, I'll just agree with LBJ or I'll just do that. Because he worked for LBJ for so many years, Connolly did, that it's just going to be difficult to try and go against someone that you kind of look up to, which Johnson opened up a lot of doors for Connolly as well too. But the idea for the trip, Johnson's statements of Kennedy wanting to make fundraising dinners, and other people, that was what Kennedy was going for. They were focusing on the reelection. He said, I need to get more pull in Texas. I want to go down there and make 5 fundraising dinners, trips. I think there's a famous one, and it's a very eerie one, where he's gets given the Texas hat and he goes to put it on and he puts it down and you hear the crowd just silent. And they're like, they want to see him put it on the hat to know that you're one of us as a Texan, or you're showing that you're with Texas. And he didn't put it on because he didn't want to mess up his hair, which is like, it's insane just that video watching it, because you could feel everybody just like clench up like when he's about to put the hat on and just be like, oh.
And some people yelled, "Put it on, put it on." Remember what he said? He said, "You come to the White House on Monday, and I'll put it on there."
Yeah, that's a
Again,
good
who
response.
knew, right? Who knew that? But there's another. Like, this is one I'm trying to document because I want to be very careful in my book is to have at least 2 sources for everything. Um, I had heard that Johnson's prepared comments from the LBJ ranch that Friday night, which he never got to deliver, he was going to say in front of, they expected 1,000 people, he was going to say, "Thank God, President Kennedy, we got you out of Dallas alive." Can you, if he was really going to say that, not, of course, not meaning anything other than to make a kind of a
Well,
joke.
it's eerie, just
Yeah,
the
that's the
concept
word,
of it. Because
eerie.
again, he was warned about going to Dallas. It was the city of hate. I don't think anybody expected an assassination, and I don't think it was the people that were going to be that violent towards JFK. Because again, Connolly even talked about JFK locking eyes with people in the crowd, and a little girl that ran out was the only incident that happened that the Secret Service had to jump out and grab the little girl and like get her out of the road and stuff like that. Which is just, it matches the Kennedy kind of mystique, or the people aspect of it, that RFK, shaking so many hands, his cufflinks would get worn out or taken off or something like that. Always had to constantly have a replacement of cufflinks. But when we talk about that kind of interesting part with Dallas and kind of the ramifications that came afterwards, the overall thing based on anybody's own experiences and interviews, that knowledge is so important, just on the concept of, even if you don't agree with that person's take or what they viewed it from, it adds more layers to this thing that has become so complex that there are so many things, Mexico City, all these other aspects that we don't know if he went, we don't know if he did go, Oswald, we don't know if JFK, the Dallas, were they all spitting at him or were they all in love with him? The very simple stuff can get lost in the minutia, and I think it's important we have these conversations. I'm happy you were able to research all this and also live this experience. I know we started talking about RFK, but it always drifts into JFK, or JFK drifts into RFK.
Sure. You
I had
mentioned the Adlai Stevenson incident in Dallas. There was an incident involving LBJ and Lady Bird where they spat at them in Dallas. So,
Well, someone tried to assassinate a plot against Johnson. They haven't released the full tape on the archives yet, but there was a plot against Johnson in '64. They talked about with the Secret Service. He had an issue with them, and talking about kind of like what was going on. And yeah, LBJ actually, I think it was 2 nights before or the week before. You can look up the article of it. Someone almost shot LBJ. Um, I forgot what the situation was. You'd have to look it up. I think I made a clip about it as well too. I could post it in the comments, but yeah, he was the only one that was like actually like was in like danger beforehand of like with Dallas, which was interesting. And I looked it up, and Johnson's polling went down in Texas with on the Kennedy ticket. He was losing a lot of people because a lot of people were, not liking what certain areas. And again, everyone says Kennedy was loved by everybody. Nobody hated Kennedy. Well, that's not true. His polls were getting really, really low in certain areas because of the reaction of his first kind of term. Again, you get into aspects like with RFK and JFK, MLK people, historians have a different perspective on those two, just based on their view. But that's because, again, everyone's worried about reelections. Nixon didn't want to make peace in South Vietnam until he was elected so he can get the credit for it. He had it all done. If you really cared about getting peace, you would do it no matter if you were president or not. You would make the negotiation or give someone the ability to so they can be able to use it and get this war over with if you're really against war. But no, Nixon wanted to delay it until he was president so he can get the credit and get all the glory of it. That's an issue as a politician. And as a person that you're looking for who you're going to select and who you're going to be grouped in with or want to be associated with as under their party, I don't know, Nixon and that one, he's been so complicated that I've been like, I don't know, man. You can't trust him. I wouldn't give you, any word you say I would take with a grain of salt.
By the way, do you know who Nixon thought was responsible for President Kennedy's assassination?
He said Johnson.
Johnson.
Yeah.
Barry Goldwater, Johnson. The list of people who.
Well, Barry Goldwater's any of his alleged things involve Johnson. He hated Johnson with a passion. If you want to talk about a relationship that's interesting there, that one's the big one. I wanted to get to some of these clips here because I think you're going to find some of these interesting. We've mentioned a lot of their things, but one of the things I mentioned on our first episode, it's an interview with Malcolm Kilduff, and it was about John F. Kennedy and about him not being part of what the so-called President's Club. So I'll play this real quick, and then I'll probably play one or two more, and then we can do some commenting. Feel free to comment after these as well, too, if you've never heard this before.
It's unfortunate, but I think it has to be said that Kennedy was never regarded as a member of what is affectionately known as the club on the Hill. When he was a senator, he stayed somewhat to himself. He did not play the you scratch my back, I scratch yours game as the other 99 might have. Therefore, he was not, even though he had been a member of the Senate, was not regarded by other members of the Senate.
It's of the Senate, right?
As some of the people like Eastland and
Richard Russell,
Dick Russell of Georgia, people of that ilk, as Stu Symington, and even Henry Jackson. It just didn't work out that way. He just so therefore, when he went to the White House, the power of the presidency was probably less than he thought it was.
Probably less than what he thought it was. That's, to me, again, it hints at a lot of the things I kind of already believed, which was kind of like what makes policies. What is it, the guy, the figurehead, or is it just whose hands are you greasing? I mean, look, there's Hubert Humphrey. I hate that look of Hubert Humphrey so much. Just that there's so many photos with him, but any photo with JFK in dealing with people like Everett Dirksen or others, individuals, like how this look is, it's this uncomfortable, like, what are you saying to me right now? Like, who are you? Like, why do you think like I'm going to do these things? Like, you're acting like these are already kind of established, but the only comfortable pictures and photos I've really seen have been with friends close to Kennedy. And I mean, actual people that knew Kennedy. And I think it's the statement from Jackie where she said, anything I ever heard where they called JFK Jack or something like that, I knew that they weren't real. Because I was the only one that called him Jack. You know, everyone called him Mr. President. Even Bobby, when he took office, JFK did. He only called him Mr. President, and he stuck it to a professional doing this duty because he believed it got the people to also start that and get it, this solidified as this is what you call him. This is what you respect him as, the president. He's a symbol of unity. That came from George Reedy as well too. Now I played this clip. Did you have anything you want to say, or you want me to play the next one?
Well, I think there was several things going on here that John Kennedy himself did not like to socialize with the senators. He didn't play that game. But there was a real generational issue too. Look at them all; they're all much older than President Kennedy. But there were two names mentioned that were on President Kennedy's vice presidential shortlist: Stuart Symington and Scoop Jackson. In fact, Robert Kennedy was pressing for Scoop Jackson. He really liked Henry Jackson. Johnson was never on that list, by the way. Isn't that amazing? That was
I can believe
out
it.
of nowhere.
Again, he wasn't necessarily the most social guy unless you were from that South area that kind of understood what Johnson was actually saying. This one I wanted to play was that John McCone. It's RFK and JFK in a conversation.
Did you see his article today? Yeah. Well, that was obviously based on what John told us. John McCone looked good. Yeah, but I didn't think he looked great. No, that's what he said. I wrote that story in order to make sure that the record was clear of what they're doing. What, that they're putting it out? Yeah. Yeah, but of course he put it that he was only sending it into the CIA. CIA, but he said CIA is pouring it out? Yeah. And I think he specified that on behalf of John McCone. And McCone was right? Well, that John McCone, that they're trying to make themselves look good. Yeah. I mean, that's what he said. This is where it's coming from, he said. Yeah. He's a real bastard, that John McCone. However, they got him. Do you have any No, he was useful at a time. Yeah, that point's really evaporated, but he's making stuff so of course everybody's on to him now. That's the trouble. He's stupid himself. Everybody's saying he's a horse's ass.
Which is funny because isn't John McCone the one that told or talked to RFK in the yard and also stated that did one of your men do this? And it's funny, I have a John McCone interview in one of these clips. That's one of them, but I'm going to look for the John McCone clip where he's talking about RFK, and he talks about the Robert Kennedys. That's how he states it, the Robert Kennedys. This is it right here. This is John McCone of the CIA. Well, retired now, but about his experience and relationship with RFK.
We knew a number of people in Washington. Perhaps among the most interesting were the Robert Kennedys.
Oh, really?
We saw a great deal of them socially, and of course I had a great deal to do with them in government.
Yeah.
But both...
he was a very energetic and talented young man.
Both Bobby and his wife Ethel were very energetic and very nice people.
Do you think Bobby would have made a good president?
I can't answer that. I can answer affirmatively and negatively. Yeah. It's very hard to judge. I do think he was a more conservative man than JFK. We knew
more conservative man than JFK.
That doesn't sound right, but that was his opinion. I think I mentioned on the last episode that Ethel took John under her wing after his wife died of cancer, and had him at Hickory Hill a lot of times, and really held him together. But I'm surprised about his last characterization of Robert Kennedy. It's just the opposite compared to his brother. I thought President Kennedy was much more conservative.
Well, a lot of people say RFK. Well, I mentioned that in our first episode that John McCone stated that RFK was more conservative than his brother. I mean, I could see it uncovering certain things just on the basis of his tactics with the FBI wiretapping and certain things about keeping a lot of things of that kind of mentality. It's not really a liberal viewpoint of where he was going. But again, RFK had a mission on his hands, and really it was anything to accomplish that mission. I honestly, I think that's what we needed at the time. I still think, like even with Johnson, what I admired more about his presidency was just the ability for him to get stuff done. I liked seeing someone that knew how this political president's club worked and was able to get things across, certain bills needing to be passed. Well, I'll call him up, and the next thing he's calling him up, he goes, "Now, don't you do that?" And he's kind of giving the Johnson treatment over the phone, where it's like, don't muscle me around. Don't try and swing by me. You're going to do this. Come on now. Like, do I have to go grab a drink or bring your old lady out without you or something like he's saying something that's really getting to people and then giving them kind of something in return. Now, this is the characterization I mentioned about the presidency, George Reedy, when a president gets put in a position. And honestly, it's so true to me from what I heard, and I want to get your opinion on it.
Try to picture yourself as president. You've given an order. 4,000 or 5,000 men get killed because of the order you've given. Are you going to say to yourself, I'm not talking now about making propaganda, talking to other people. Are you going to say to yourself, my God, 4,000 or 5,000 men are dead because I was a damn fool? I killed those men? No. You know what you're going to say? You're going to say those men died in a noble cause, and we've got to be sure now that the cause for which they sacrificed is not in vain. So you're going to send 10,000. You get some of those killed, and you're going to send 20,000. Get a big bunch of those killed, you're going to send 40,000. But there is another very subtle point. Once the government decides that a president has made up his mind, the whole force of the government closes in to reinforce his thinking and to tell him how best to do it. The advice a president gets after a certain point is not whether he should or should not do something. He'll get that at the beginning. But once he makes a decision, then everybody tells him how best to do it.
And you hear this with, I don't think it's Dean Russell, I think it's Walt Rustow. He talked about like having a different view than Johnson and voicing it. And then he was like, but he's the president. So overall, we're going to do what the president says. And again, Johnson's information, you stem it back to earlier conversations. None of that is his. A lot of it's just what people told him. And sadly, he looked up to the wrong individuals. I'll give you an example, and it's about RFK. It's one of the people that I'm sure you know. Who did Johnson look up to the most out of all the people? He called him his, not his wise men, but the one that he called like his, you could technically say two names on this, but it was Eisenhower.
Abe Fortas, I would say, is number one. Abe Fortas?
Abe Fortas is confidential, but when it came to just what LBJ went to for overall guidance on his decision-making was usually either Richard Russell, which later took a turn because he said it's the student teaching the master on a phone call to Richard Russell because Russell didn't know what to do on a certain situation, but Eisenhower. And this was actually a really interesting call, and this was about RFK.
Tell you one thing I've got a problem with. I sure wished I could get some little help, and I guess I oughtn't to. I don't want to shove it, but I mentioned it once before. You remember you talked to me about a certain young man, and he's given me lots of problems. You told me about what he's doing in your foundation and the other administration he was kind of running. And now he's getting ready to make a tour over the country, and he's shown a little unhappiness, and he says that I listen to Dirksen too much, and I listen to other groups too much, and Bobby Kennedy.
Oh, yeah.
You remember you told me the first week you were in some of the problems that you thought I'd have with him and created.
The first day I saw him.
That's right. And so that's an accurate prediction. Now he's getting ready to go off on a big tour to Latin America, and he's going to tell them what we've done in the Dominican Republic and other things. I just wish there's some way that we could blow it up and puff it up before this other thing occurs. I'll tell you one thing.
Again, conspiracy people go to this other thing occurs. This was like approaching like a certain point in like politics where there was an issue going on. I don't remember if it was the Bobby Baker stuff or what was going on. And there was a re-election process that was coming up. I think this was in 64, if I'm not mistaken. It's in 60. I put the title of it at the top. Yeah, 65. So 8/27/65. You'd have to look up what political issue was going on. I'm pretty sure a lot of it was the Baker stuff, and then starting a little bit towards the end, or I don't know if it was this far in Manchester's book. I got a clip on Manchester I'm going to play too. But that's what he meant. He wasn't talking about anything about an assassination happening because it's still 3 years before we deal with RFK's assassination, which I don't think Johnson was behind. I think that was FBI or somebody that was doing something on that side of the thing. It seemed very orchestrated government-wise, very clear to LAPD's destruction of evidence and stuff. But again, he went to Eisenhower over all his decisions, and Eisenhower does a little bit of a flip, too, when it came to the Vietnam War. You know, Eisenhower's like, you need to finish this for me, like this type mentality that he was kind of boasting on LBJ. And Reedy, again, in an interview, states that, you know, when Johnson came in, the Johnson people looked at the Kennedy people of like what to do, and Johnson just figured he didn't want to do bad with the Kennedy people, And he continued a lot of what JFK was doing already in Vietnam and then escalated it from there. Again, if you look at it, everyone states that he's escalating troops. Where's the evidence of him pulling out? We find those documents later, but publicly he states this different thing, doing something on the side. It's a very smart strategy so your opponent doesn't know what you're doing, or other people, nefarious forces, whether it's inside your own government, know what you're doing. And that's sadly, when in a situation like this, when he got killed before any of this could come to fruition, because I do believe he would have pulled out of Vietnam again, but we have to stick with what the record publicly states as well too. Inserting these things, sadly, it doesn't do much clarity on the situation. It actually makes it a little bit more confusing as well too. Bill, I'm sorry I ranted.
There are two ex-presidents that President Kennedy found useless. Eisenhower was one, and Harry Truman was the other.
Really? Truman?
Yeah, Truman.
Oh, man, I have such a changing opinion on him after he made his statement and Allen Dulles had to make him recant it. The one about the CIA, where he's like, I think the CIA has gone way past what its initial...
He wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post in December 1963 saying, I made a big mistake letting the CIA do what they're doing.
And freaking Truman was like, I'm not taking that down or recanting it. And then Allen Dulles had to get it pulled. And it's only in the Internet Archive where it got posted and they had to print a retraction out of it.
Yes,
but this one is, this next one right here is George Reedy again. It's Kennedy had it right.
That nobody else is around with whom he has a normal human relationship. You see, the president has no normal human relationships.
This would have been true of Adlai Stevenson or George McGovern
absolutely.
or Eugene McCarthy.
You know, Jack Kennedy recognized the fact. I think he was as bad a victim of it as anybody else. But he recognized the fact. One of the first things he told his staff after he got in the White House, I want every one of you to realize you make no friends after you enter this place. Well, that's a very interesting observation because a White House assistant suddenly takes on all kinds of friends. All sorts of people that he didn't even know suddenly become his closest bosom companions. Now, Kennedy was right. You don't make friends, and you lose all your old ones because you can no longer have a normal human relationship. And even his recognition of the fact that it was going to happen, however, he started to get into, I think very clearly, fell into the same syndrome.
And again, there was paranoia with Hoover. We had mentioned Hoover and RFK in the beginning. Hoover was getting paranoid with McNamara and Robert Kennedy later on. And RFK talked about it in an interview with Time Magazine where he started talking about putting a wiretap on him. And they're like, putting a wiretap on Hoover? And like, no, putting a wiretap on McNamara. Hoover was paranoid that, it was me and him going after Hoover. But Hoover was going nuts. He needed to be taken out of that position because he was getting old and he was becoming very paranoid. And again, we talk about information that kind of gets pulled out with Hoover, Kennedy assassination type stuff, the blackmail of keeping himself in the position of saying, I have this about you and this about you, and I saw this. And he did that a lot to RFK, and RFK talked about it a lot. He would bring up, I think the president's involved in this. I think the president's involved in this. And RFK would have to go check it out. And RFK kept saying there was really no evidence to some of these claims, but it was like he was testing us to make sure that if there is this thing, can we get ahead of it before? Which again, as an FBI director, you want them kind of ahead of any bad press stories, but not trying to trick you, like getting you into questions and all this. And it becomes Ellen Romestich.
Romich.
Do you believe any of that stuff that involved Jack, or because RFK had her deported? So again, it makes it more complex about the relationship with Hoover if he's working on that aspect of things. And again, I'm a Kennedy person through and through. I do like Johnson. I just think like trying to bring this information to light so someone who's spending their whole life researching Kennedy assassination, it was like when I learned about Richard Russell. I watched interviews with the guy and he's talking about doing a coup in Vietnam every other week. And he thinks that's the proper way to proceed. And if you're not serving for your country, how is it that a person who is in the same high school class as you, that you graduated with, has served in 3 wars and you haven't served in any? It's your public duty to serve. That's the guy that was bullied into agreeing with the Warren Commission report by Johnson, that everyone mentions all the time about saying you're damn well going to serve. Again, I have to think differently about that figure. And if I use him as an example, because I don't agree with his later comments and I don't think we align that much. So, looking at some of these things, what do you think about statements that get mentioned that support your point, and then looking at someone, the same person later, and seeing a different thing that you don't agree with?
Yeah, it's part of the insiders game in D.C. That's the culture. That's been that way for a very, very long time. There is a good book that I would recommend, though, a real in-depth look at the LBJ RFK relationship. It's by Jeff Shesol. It's called Mutual Contempt. I don't know if you haven't had Jeff on your show, Robbie, but if you want, I'd love to introduce you to him.
Yes, please. I'd love to talk
He's
to him
done
about that.
a great job. He's more balanced than I am, but he's been a good source of support for me in the book that I'm working on.
No, I like the balance. I try and find that in a lot of things, even with conspiracies, because again, you can start being everything's a conspiracy. Everyone's out. It just makes you more insane, and then you have a bunch of things you can't answer. So I like to try and find what's the most reasonable, thing, like the Secret Service flashing out guns to remove JFK's body from Dallas. A lot of people go like I've listened to a lot of interviews like Earl Rose and people that were there that talk about not really seeing guns. Like you knew that they had them, but they weren't like shown in their face or anything. But again, the main job of the Secret Service now is to protect the now president, which is Johnson. And he was not going to leave Jackie at Dallas, and Jackie was not leaving without her husband's body. So now it's a security concern. And again, tensions get heated, emotions get high, and maybe some threats were made or some statements or some gestures and things happened. I do believe that, but I don't think it was because they needed to get the body somewhere different so they can manipulate it. The autopsy has its own questions that are based in fact about where the hell is the brain, which do you think RFK took that thing? You did? Okay. We talked about this on the first episode, but again, I just found this out today. I've been doing all these clips on Bobby Baker. The Carousel Hotel is in my state, Ocean City, Maryland. I'm like, no shit. Like, that's crazy. I found that today after doing months and months of these clips about Bobby Baker. I'm like, that's insane. And I know the hotel. I've been to it. Sorry, is it nerd?
So you're connected, huh, Bob?
No, I might have been involved. This one was about the difference between the Kennedy brothers. John McCone's comment about it.
I do think he was a more conservative man than JFK, and he was much more conservative than the popular impression gained from his campaigning.
I think it was very necessary to be around JFK too, wasn't he? I mean, didn't he do him an awful lot of good?
Did him a great deal of good. He was very close to him. They were very close together, and I think that his advice and comments to the president were very valuable to the president, because he could scoop up information from outside the perimeter of the White House that the president couldn't get. And then he would report it to the president in the greatest of confidence.
I feel like you got more trust on what your brother tells you compared to what, another person or associate or someone, Hoover, anybody that would kind of already be like, I don't know you that well. Like, I know you think I'm your friend, but I don't know you. You have to make that relationship with me. And this was Robert Kennedy, and this is Malcolm Kilduff stating, who gave the order to be sworn in.
So at that time, he had talked with Robert Kennedy.
Johnson, you mean?
Right. Johnson had talked to Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy's advice to him was that he be sworn in Dallas. So then they had to go and find someone who could swear him in.
So this is the kind of stuff you were doing before Mrs. Kennedy got back, is that right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So
because she was there when he was sworn in.
That's right. So by that time, they then located Judge Sarah Hughes and got her on her way, I guess, in a police car out to the airport. In the meantime, they brought the president's body back. They'd gotten him in a casket. And
was there some kind of problem back Texas wanted control of the body to...
Oh, yeah, the coroner there had attempted to hold the body for autopsy.
And he should have done it, because he even states in his interviews, I could have squashed all these conspiracies if you would have let me just have it there. But when you let the body get out of Dallas and you flew it to Bethesda, you let all this time go and all these issues go and people that weren't properly able to handle it. It all could have been squashed. And I believe like Earl Rose would have done his job. He knew how to do this. And
I don't think there could have been a worse autopsy than the one that was done at Bethesda. It just violated all the rules of good autopsies by two people who never did a gunshot autopsy in their lives. So you can't argue with Earl Rose on that. Henry Wade was the one who made the decision, by the way, to tell Rose, you can't keep the body in Dallas. Let the Secret Service take it over. So that was District Attorney Henry Wade's contribution to history.
And well, yeah, he actually got a mention in a recent thing I was doing, listening to some tapes. I'm gonna make a clip on. I'll have to send that over to you when I finally get it finished. But yeah, Henry Wade, his name goes through a bunch of different things when it comes to the police work, the amazing skill of the Dallas police to catch the lone nut assassin, alleged. This one is I'm gonna play a clip about. Let's do the LBJ. Be proud of your boys. He's talking to Joe Kennedy Sr. and Ann Gargan, 5/11/64.
I know you must be awfully proud of the training you gave those boys. And I sure do want to see you, and I hope you're feeling better. And I hope you enjoy Hyannisport, and maybe I'll get to come to see you before too long. And if there's anything I can do, you please have Ann call me.
Hello, sir?
Yes, Ann.
Well, thank you very much.
And I told him, if he didn't understand it, that Bobby and Teddy were doing a wonderful job, that Bobby works day and night on civil rights, and he's going to get a good bill, and Teddy is just the most popular thing in America.
Oh, well, thank you, sir.
Every place he goes, he was down in Georgia, and he was over in Maryland, and he's up New York, and every place they just crazy about him, and every member of the Senate, both sides, Democrats and Republicans, just think he's more popular than Jack or Lyndon or anybody ever was in the Senate.
Oh, well, that's great. No, thank you. Uncle Joe's been very good, but he was a little bit stunned by your call.
Well, you explained to him how proud I am of both of them, and what a wonderful job they're doing, and how much training and how much time I know he spent on them, and how proud he ought to be.
Fine. Thank you very much, sir.
Bye.
Goodbye.
By the way, Robbie, unlike John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Teddy was a member of the club. He took a whole different approach to the Senate and was a very effective legislator.
Oh, I'm sorry. It automatically starts the clip when the thing plays. If you were wondering why in Joseph Sr. you could barely understand what he was saying, he's almost inaudible at that point.
He could only say no. That was the only word he could say. No. In the background, you hear it. He's going, no. That was painful to think of. Johnson must have known Joe Kennedy's condition. Again, I don't want
he
to
also
question
thought
motives.
at a point, like when he only called Rose when Jack died, it was a thing of kind of, I have to be the one to break the news to him. Like he's got to hear it from somebody, and I don't want him to hear it from some press person. Like I didn't take the time as the president. I mean, again, LBJ called Tippett's wife, the cop that was shot in Dallas on that day, and apologized to her and all this other type of stuff. And he didn't have to do that. But again, it's the president's duty. It's bad publicity if you don't. You know, it's the kind of Reedy even mentions a few examples with Baker and the issue. And Johnson's like, why do we even have to talk about it? It's going to bring it up again. He's like, it would be good if you got the photo of RFK's resignation and you're shaking his hand and all that type of stuff, because it would be more backlash later if we don't have that. And that's what Reedy states to Johnson. Johnson's like, okay, I don't know. I don't think it makes sense. It's going to not be good for either of us. He's already not happy with the decision. So it's like, you know, this whole thing. And I wanted to play this one, which is, again, people whispering into Johnson's ears. This is Robert Kittner.
I think they're friendly. He says not, though.
I don't think the Kennedys are for you in any way.
No, I think that's right.
Now, one of the things that bothers Mike Coles is that Bobby is leaking all the material in these articles on the basis that if they do get an injunction, they will be published anyway.
Oh.
He was very factual about it. He said he paid, $650,000 on what he thought was a fair deal, and I think Mike should get the credit that he had cut down his judgment, the derogatory material about you, about 90%. But now he found himself with a magazine that he'd already printed. But even if it came out, the New York Times was getting it free every morning.
I think they're friendly. He says not, though.
A lot of this is about the Manchester book. This was a comment about that, and there was a lawsuit against Manchester. He had edited his book, and Jackie was also apologetic and didn't realize what was being put in it. And Bobby was mad that it was edited, and so was Manchester mad that it was edited. But a lot of it was hit towards Johnson, like a hit book against Johnson of remarks and things like that. And again, when this started coming out, Johnson started getting very angry with Bobby. And I think I have one of this is a conversation with a few people, not just Johnson.
All right, anything else either one of y'all want to say to me? Bill, what worries me is how anyone would know this to give to Manchester.
Mr. President, he just went all over the place, I understand, and talked to everybody. And let me tell you exactly about my conversation with Goodwin yesterday. I think I relayed most of it in the high points. Goodwin said it's become a very emotional thing between Mrs. Kennedy and Manchester, because she asked him to do this and as a tribute, as a memoriam to her husband, but it has run amok and has become a very sensationalized, at least in look, a very sensationalized Saturday Evening Post type thing. Now, Goodwin said, and I'm just relaying his words. Goodwin said that on Sunday of last week, there was a very intense, anguished 4-hour session at Hyannisport in which Bobby was president, Teddy was president, others were president, including Gardner Coles, in which Teddy Kennedy said, if you, Gardner Coles, serialize this book, we're going to bring suit against you.
All right, anything else either one of y'all?
I thought that was interesting. Again, it kind of explains a little bit more about the whole situation with Manchester. And again, it's stuff you don't hear, especially a lot of stuff like Robert Caro's book, even Manchester's book, that becomes part of like LBJ's like ideas in people's heads. And I again, I don't know. Like I said, I can't, some of the stories might be true, but till we get the tapes, I won't be able to verify any of the things he interviewed Berkeley about, the doctor for JFK, or any of these other things, because these are problems we have with very important information in the assassination that would probably help us.
In the so-called Battle of the Book, Robert Kennedy's popularity plummeted because of how he was portrayed as handling it. So it was a very, very painful time. And yet, you would think if you're William Manchester, you'd be very bitter about it. But Manchester endorsed Robert Kennedy for the Senate in New York, and he endorsed him in his presidential campaign. So despite him bearing the brunt of Robert Kennedy being in some ways at his worst, he overlooked that and decided that Robert Kennedy was the right man to hold office.
I'll play a couple more clips here, and then we'll get to a wrapping point. This one's Kennedy gets all the credit. It's kind of how Johnson was feeling about everything after everyone kind of, we talk about the shadow aspect of Kennedy. This was kind of what Johnson was feeling.
And they say Johnson hogs all the show, that he has to make all the announcements, that he has to brag all the time, that there's not a goddamn man that he's appointed that'll get out and say anything, because Jack Valenti said he is a good president. And he slept better at night, so the Kennedys just mobbed him and murdered him, smeared him, and everybody else is too cowardly to say a goddamn word. Now that's what a poll that we had made nationwide. I don't want to circularize it, say so, but that's what it says. And it says that Rusk and McNamara are talking too much, and I'm too overexposed, and the other candidate's too underexposed, and that 70% of the people think the Great Society is Kennedy's.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
10%. Well, 10% think it's Roosevelt, 20% Johnson, 70 Kennedy.
No, I can't believe that.
Well, they do, and they take it up one by one. They say, why do you think, who authored poverty? Said President Kennedy. Kennedy met first year he was there and started the poverty program. That's what they think.
Well, I think Bob Kennedy is reeling right now. I'm not sure that he's not true as a national figure. I'm really not.
I hope he is, and I believe he is, but he sure got these papers working. I heard old Sandy Van Oker just denounced the vice president for explaining our position in Vietnam and just gave him uncharted hell for about 10 minutes.
And then I'm going to play this one, a spiteful Bobby Kennedy. Same conversation.
I think Bob Kennedy is reeling right now. I'm not sure that he's not true as a national figure. I'm really not.
I hope he is, and I believe he is, but he sure got these papers working. I heard old Sandy Van Oker just denounced the vice president for explaining our position in Vietnam, and just gave him uncharted hell for about 10 minutes here on NBC. I just listened to him. Just like he'd been hired to reply to him. He's Bobby's boy, you know. But he's just almost insulting. But that's what the poll shows. I'll go over the poll with you. It shows that I would lead Kennedy, and shows I lead Romney. But it also shows that the people are really upset with the domestic program. Incidentally, I think crime is number 3. Price is number 1, Vietnam number 2, and crime's number 3.
Well, I think we're just way out in front on crime, Mr. President. I really do.
Well, are you going to get it passed, or are they going to tie you up? I see where this damn Poff of Virginia says he's not going to let you do this or that.
Oh, Poff. We'll make that all right.
Do you know anything about CIA?
Not much. I've talked with him since our conversation a time or two. I picked up our sources and got that lined up. I'm now waiting for...
I'm figuring on taking Gardner off this committee and putting you on it. I'm going to have Rusk and the Attorney General.
And I just thought those were interesting because that's Ramsey Clark, and he had some information when he was looking into the assassination. He talked about David Ferry's death, also missing autopsy photograph and issues with some autopsy-related material. And this is LBJ and Nicholas Katzenbach. I think that, yeah, they cut off the date on that one.
You can truthfully say it. Kennedy insisted for 2 years that he come and make 5 money-raising speeches. And he finally told him in my presence, said, Mr. President, they're going to think all the Kennedys want out of Texas is money. You haven't been down here. Said, I'd suggest you make 1 money-raising speech, and whatever else you do totally non-political. And he told him that in the spring, April, and he told him that in June. And then, because I wouldn't encourage it, by God, he called him up and wouldn't let me know he was calling him. And he came up here and had a secret meeting with him, and I found out about it because he asked Bill Moyer to advance it. And he said, he told John, the reason he didn't tell me, the vice president's not enthusiastic. So, we go through all that kind of stuff. But even if we had made the tragic mistake of forcing this poor man to put up a deer head here along with his fish, I don't know who forced him to put up the fish in the fish room that he caught in his honeymoon, but I damn sure didn't force him to put up anything. You can truthfully...
I mentioned something that you mentioned in the first episode about the hunting the deer, but yeah, his fish when he caught on his honeymoon, he's like, I didn't do him do that. There's this one, I don't think I put this in here, but this is funny for me. Because I love Johnson when he talks.
We just got to save this damn country. This country, we haven't got any cinch on winning out there at all. It's just the opposite, I'm afraid. And I just think that we, I don't think Russ can do it, McNamara can do it, I can do it. I think maybe you're fresh enough and objective enough and judicious enough and honest enough and sincere enough, friend of all concerned. You don't have to be a traitor to anybody. You just have to be good and do what's right. But somebody's going to have to divide up the pie here and say, now, I never make a critical word of any Kennedy at any time. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to say it. I'm dodging. I've taken these damn books and these things, and now John Connolly's writing one. What he's going to say, God knows. But I know one thing you can truthfully say. Kennedy insisted for 2 years that he come and make 5 money-raising speeches. And he finally told him in my presence, said, Mr. President, they're going to think all the Kennedys want out of Texas is money.
That they're talking about John Connolly stating that he had a secret meeting with JFK, like I mentioned. It wasn't secret; it was just a meeting without Johnson there. And Johnson, I have a clip on it. He talks about Connolly talks about the backlash with Johnson about that. You know, he had talked to him. He's like, "Are we still friends? Like, what is going on? Like, I don't understand. You're having a meeting. You're discussing these trip plans. I thought I was going to be involved in it, and they wanted to do it without Johnson being there. Just again, you know, Johnson's an intimidating figure." And then this is about Abe Fortas, which you mentioned, close confidant. He said Bobby got news on this assassination thing. This is what the quote is. And I believe the date is, I will have to put the link in the comments.
Say, Bobby's making quite a show of this assassination thing. Got a big story in U.S. News this week. Truth about Kennedy assassination. Question raised and answered. I haven't read it, but it looks like it does a good job for the Warren Commission. But He's got everybody raising questions about it. They claim now the Manchester book's going to raise a lot of questions. He's got Lou Harris running the poll, and the majority of them doubt that this is the whole story on Kennedy. Do you see that poll?
Yes, sir.
So, and 2% of them think that I did it.
Yeah.
According to Lou Harris.
Yeah.
Now, Lou Harris is just owned by Bobby.
Sure.
He got him making polls all over the country. He got him to make this one showing that he beat me 2 points, which was a phony at the time, although I think it's true now, because I think that they've sold the poll all over the country.
Yeah.
And I think everybody says, oh, God.
Again, they're talking about the Manchester book was a lot of influence by Bobby, and Johnson's now taking it as like the 2% in the book that are claiming that I did it, and these polls that Lou Harris have. That's an insert with Bobby, like kind of keeping that like Johnson could have been behind it. Really, again, it could have been a dig at Johnson. It could have been something like that. But that's how they both acted. It wasn't just RFK in this. Johnson did the same thing with materials and certain things. And if you look from RFK's perspective, the biggest slight in doing all these things is, not giving him the vice presidential spot, calling his parents when, his brother's killed, all these other types of things, calling Jackie all the time and having these conversations that Jackie's probably reiterating back to RFK. And it was so disgusting. And like these types of things, again, it fuels both fires. It's the people around us. It's these types of things. I want to play. I'm going to see if I could just try and find one more, because you've given me so much of your time. And I know I'm probably...
I wanted to just interject, because the name George Romney came up, and he was considered a strong Republican potential candidate in 1964. Romney had a great quote. He once said, Franklin Roosevelt gave us the New Deal, Harry Truman gave us the Fair Deal, and Lyndon Johnson has given us an ordeal. I thought that was a very clever quote.
I think, like I said, I think Johnson is focused more he should have been focused more, well, he was focused more as a domestic issues. He wasn't fit for the foreign policy and all the other stuff that came with it. And I think he, at the time, only was thinking domestically when it came to the presidential spot, because later we know in 67, 68, he's regretting the presidential spot. And early 68, January, is when he's talking about Nixon, and he's mentioning certain things to give Nixon and advice and people to look towards and these types of things, because he's just fed up. He doesn't want to be president anymore. He's not running for re-election. Now, this is Katzenbach on 3/17/66, stating his relationship with Bobby.
My relationship with Bobby has never been particularly personal. It's mostly been professional, but maybe I can do something.
It looks like to me that he could see that this administration is not against him. Every man I have named was either named by his brother, or I believe with one exception. With one exception. Weaver was named by his brother. Fowler was named by his brother. Katzenbach was named by his brother. I think it's a rather unusual thing when a president doesn't have a single man. Larry O'Brien was named by his brother. I think I've demonstrated that I'm not a bigoted, biased, prejudiced, anti-Kennedy man.
It's funny because when he repeated himself, he burped, and he just decided to repeat the sentence. That's classic Johnson. But when he constantly kind of brought up this issue of not having his own people in the White House, and that was his biggest mistake, was trying to keep these Kennedy people on board. But everyone was giving him advice about what he was going to do with the Kennedy people, and there was a big concern that a lot of people were going to be relieved. I think Ted Sorensen resigned, Ken O'Donnell resigned.
Right.
Well, Ted was really messed up, and there's a clip on here. I'll put it in the comments as well too. And if I don't, someone just comment, put it there, and I'll find it for you. Or you can look it up on my channel. He's talking with Katharine Graham, I think, and they're talking about, I've never seen Ted this way. Like, he's not even like being subtle in his hate. He's just hating everything and everybody. Like, his anger's coming out, and he couldn't deal with the death of JFK, which he resigned to write his book. And again, even Johnson did him a favor there, because he appreciated the speeches that he wrote for Johnson. And he was like, told Edwin Weisel anything this guy wants, because Edwin Weisel had connections with like Hollywood and productions and all these other types of things. He's like, help him anywhere he needs. Like, if he's going to do a job or take this outside of whatever, he's got a book that he's producing, just help him along his way, and all this. And he wanted to keep contact with Sorensen, but it just never happened, or we haven't gotten those tapes released. But it's sad because some people were truly affected.
I got very close to Ted Sorensen the last few years of his life. In fact, he's the one who told me the Cuban Missile Crisis story about Johnson and the snake. He reenacted it for me. I thought the world of Ted Sorensen. He was one of those, by the way, who was advising Robert Kennedy not to run for president in 1968. He was on the other side of wait your turn. Everything will go well in 1972. So he was rather cautious. I want to make one other point, though, about the Great Society. Robert Kennedy did not like that whole Great Society concept. He thought it fostered dependence. He came up with an alternative in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. And this might be some evidence of thinking that he might have been a bit more conservative. His approach to poverty was to bring in private enterprise, not rely on the government completely, even though he supported Medicare and Medicaid and things like that. But he did try to distance himself from the LBJ Great Society approach by involving business, and that was more conservative. So on that one, I think there's some ammunition to support the thought of his being a bit more conservative.
Play this last ones, and I'll get you out of here, Bill. Again, thank you for the time, and let me play these clips because I thought, I don't know, if anything, at the ending, I'll ask you what your perspective is on Johnson now, if you have any kind of change of anything. This is Nobody's Stopping Bobby. It's a continuation from the last video we just listened to with Katzenbach, same phone call.
Well, what do you think? You think that he thinks the Texas establishment is tried to keep him from being senator, or doesn't want him to be senator?
No, I don't think so, Mr. President. I think it's well, I don't really know what I do think.
I'll tell you what Bob McNamara thinks. Bob McNamara thinks that he thinks that it's politically wise to be not to be identified with this administration. Get away from it. Now, my judgment is that if I'm president, I think I'm going to have something to do at conventions. I don't care how many things. I have things every day that I could move on them if I wanted to. I could move on Teddy in Boston. I could move on his boy Henry over here. Hell, a fella called up here last week with a complaint that he had been called by Henry to shake him down for a governor's race in Tennessee. And it's a damned outrage, and he's calling him on the telephone. Well, what do you think?
So Johnson knew what he could accomplish. And again, like I said in that phone call about getting Jackie's transcripts and RFK's transcripts, that's when you see that threat, that thing manifest, and him start going, all right, we're playing it this way. Again, mostly because Bobby was refusing, and so was Manchester, of accepting anything to do with editing Manchester's book. And it just, LBJ is getting the same phone call, same topic, same issue, almost the exact same words from just various people. That's got to pick at anybody. And again, it wasn't right for him to retaliate in that manner. But, I don't know. Again, it's a complicated, very tense relationship, but it's one that's lasted, so long that when you look at it now, it'll give you the most deep-seated, hated relationship between LBJ and RFK. And there was hate. It became that. I don't know who was viewing it first, or, how this went, whether this was just people doing jabs at each other, as political people tend to do from time to time. And, it just escalated from there. But this last one is the HSCA testimony. Now, this goes to some of the accomplishments. This is Ralph Salerno, who is a person who was specifically brought in to talk about organized crime. He was an organized crime expert. And this is, he talks about the work of Robert Kennedy, what the kind of crime rates and all these things were going on.
Over to another area for a moment. When I look at the chart there with reference to the organized crime program, where immediately after the president's death, there's this sharp decline in terms of the program under Attorney General Robert Kennedy. It just strikes you that this is a very striking type of thing. Can you comment further and tell us to what do you attribute the fact that the program just fell apart?
I think all of those charts and my own personal recollections of what happened then reflect that the success that you see manifested there was not only the work of the individual policemen and the agents, but the leadership position that Robert Kennedy took and afforded the entire program.
Moving on.
Again, I have more clips of Ralph Salerno on the channel if you want to hear more about that, kind of getting into the minutia of what RFK did to eliminating organized crime and his attack on organized crime. It only goes to his accomplishments. Again, I think he was successful. I would have voted for him. I know most of my family would have voted for him. I know my grandma looked up to him. So again, I am 100% wasn't trying to be against you here. I was kind of playing devil's advocate when it came to LBJ, but I kind of wanted to see what your perspective would be about LBJ after all of this and more about understanding. And again, if you still feel the same way, that's 100% fair. I wasn't expecting to change your mind or anything, but I was hoping to bring light some information that kind of shares two sides of the coin. Because again, RFK, I can show many clips with RFK talking about Johnson and things Johnson does that can be offensive, and especially if you're not into teasing. But it's that kind of understanding of history, and I think it gives us a better portrayal of how people are and humanistic everything is. Even politics, it seems childish at times. And it covers.
So how do you think Johnson will be rated in history as a president? Top third, middle third, or bottom third? I know it's an unfair question.
Bottom third. I don't know if we should rate the presidents though, because not everyone has the worst things. Obama did more drone strikes than any president in history. He increased that. George Bush for getting us involved into, we all know, I was in my lifetime, so I could tell you about that. But I think there's a lot of things that you can pick, and I think I don't vote because I don't identify under a certain party. I just believe in kind of my own morals and what I believe is right. And certain things killing, certain things. I can understand Johnson being very forceful about, I got this, what we call a peace deal in Vietnam. But as soon as I put this peace deal and say, we're not firing, if they go in the next 24 hours and decide to start shooting at my men, don't be, shocked when I start firing back at you, because that's our boys over there. A lot of people like that protection of their troops and this president's idea of like, I'll come right back at you twice as hard. The Hiroshima, Nagasaki issues, the bomb drops. Whatever your point on that is, there's a pool of people that enjoy that and feel protected. Like that's a strong president. Then there's the other one that just wants to, try and find trade negotiations, try and find deals. People like that peace route, that way of trading to get peace. A lot of people don't think some personalities can work like that. And again, that's even with today with issues. Again, I don't want to be in the position to be a president. I can imagine one person having all that. I think it's a stupid thing. And especially the Catholic issue with it, with like, oh, he's a Catholic as president. It's like, who cares? Who has good ideas? Who is talking about actual progression and not reversing back or getting us involved in something we shouldn't be involved in? So again, I know your book kind of covers a lot of the Kennedy assassination, RFK, and then also talks about modern day politics. I kind of wanted to cover the globe again on it. But you've given me so much of your time. If you have any final comments you'd like to add, and also where people can find your work.
Just a couple on just more reflections on the Johnson-Kennedy relationship. One of the things President Kennedy said he would stake his presidency on was the signing of a limited nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union. And he was able to do it. It overcame a lot of obstacles, and he really was proud of it. And 128 countries signed it. Johnson would not sign it.
They still did underground testing, though.
Yeah, well, but still, this was at least some treaty, and it was limited. That was the word in it. But Johnson would not sign it. I couldn't understand that. During Johnson's presidency, he convened a commission called the Kerner Commission to look at what was happening to our country when it came to race and violence. The commission issued a remarkable report. Johnson ignored the report. He thought it was too critical of his administration. So these are examples of where his pettiness and perhaps his ego got in the way of him doing some good things. And even though for Robert Kennedy, the Vietnam War was the number one reason he ran, the Kerner Commission was the number two reason. He said he's ignoring something that's tearing us apart, racial injustice, violence. So to me, it's a cumulative impact that I use in my assessment of Johnson. And it just comes out really highly negative. And I concede that I was affected by Robert's view of him. It rubbed off on all of us. But I think on the merits too, I think he let us down as a country in so many ways.
But didn't Johnson invite MLK and other civil rights leaders to the White House to have meetings? And he actually called MLK multiple times to talk about serious issues. There's actually a clip I have, and I'll post it in the comments too, about a lot of people talking about MLK's not for RFK, just because of the seems like he's acting like his brother and he's promising a lot of things and not holding up the ends of the deal. So I mean, again, like with Johnson civil rights, like he got that through, and sadly, I mean, like I said, I'm not arguing or supporting that him being a saint, but I'm looking at the type of person you needed to get that done. Like you needed someone that could get these other politicians that were just looking for the scratch on the back or the something to get their, you do that, I'll do this for you if you stay off me on this, or if you go with me on this. I just wish we had someone that was more in line with the civil rights goals and the progression of the country that had that type of style. I think it's George Reedy who talked about that Kennedy would bring something up to these people and they would kind of look at him, and then he would just accept kind of like the no or the maybe, and then nothing would get done. And then Johnson didn't accept the no. He never took the no. So like, to me, I don't know, at that time, I feel like that's what we needed. I feel like Nixon probably would have been better if he would have been elected instead of Kennedy. Only on a concept like with dealing with certain issues foreign wise. But if you're talking about domestic issues, it probably would have ended the same way. He's not a good politician. But I don't think anybody's really good at the game. I think it's kind of like just mastering it or trying to find some ways to trick the system.
Johnson leveraged President Kennedy's death to the fullest on civil rights. I mean, he was good enough to know that this is a moment, let's make this a tribute to my predecessor. And at the same time, he resented the fact that he was attributing it to his predecessor. So talk about a conflicted personality. I think.
Well, do you believe that it was attributed to his racism? Do you believe a lot of people call LBJ like the biggest racist there ever was? And I don't think that's true statement at all.
No, I don't remember seeing much of even Caro's books. I don't think there's much evidence of that, other than he could be condescending to so many people, blacks included. So, but I don't think there was a special particular animus against blacks. He did stop talking to Martin Luther King when Martin Luther King came out against the war. He stopped all communications with Martin Luther King. So,
well, that's also because a lot of his friends own those Bell helicopters and all those other things that were getting a little bit of kickback. So, like I said, he's not a saint. Not defending it.
There are no saints. No.
I was just bringing a more balanced take. Like I said, I didn't expect to change your mind on it. I thought it would just be an interesting conversation to kind of show you what I've been experiencing.
No, I appreciate the effort, Robbie, and don't ever give up on that. But I think Sheshol is a very balanced book, and it might be good if you want to have him on.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him. If you want to reach out to him,
I'll be happy to do that. Yeah, he's very, very good.
Thank you, Bill. Again, seriously, I hope
You're
we
welcome.
have another discussion. Let me get into some RFK clips and some historical accounts and some interviews.
You bet. You just let me know.
We can focus next on his policy. But where can people find you, Bill? You got a contact out there?
Yes, again, I appreciate all the people who reached out to me after our first episode. It really means a lot to me. Again, the email is arnonewill, ARNONEWILL @AOL.com, and I respond to all emails.
Well, thank you, Bill. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. And stay tuned for our next episode.